Let's talk about honeybee nutrition and feeding. Honeybee nutrition is the foundation of good bee management. Good nutrition can solve so many problems within the hive, so let's dive right in. We'll explore the importance of understanding bee food groups, seasonal impacts of nutrition, how weather affects nutrition, as well as how and what to feed your bees. Honeybees have three main inputs to consider in their diet: pollen, nectar, and water. Pollen is the bee's protein source. Since protein is a foundation for growth, this is used in larval feed and development, containing essential amino acids, fats, sterols, and vitamins for bee health. Nectar, which bees turn into honey, is the primary carbohydrate or energy source for adult honeybees. Honey has antimicrobial and detox properties for honeybees and actually activates immunity genes. This is part of why well-fed bees lead to healthier colonies. Water is an important part of the bee's diet as it helps to carry dissolved food minerals throughout their bodies and aids in their waste removal, digestion, and metabolism. Throughout the seasons, food sources vary in availability, so it's important to understand what to look for so you can better manage your hive's nutrition. In early spring, food availability is often scarce or unpredictable due to cold snaps. Trees will begin to bloom, and these days will be getting longer, leading the hive to increase in population, getting ready for spring. It's important to keep a close eye on the hive as they increase their population because a populous hive can easily burn through the stored resources if there's nothing coming in to replace it. Starvation is actually very common towards the end of winter and going into spring before the nectar flow really gets started, so be prepared to monitor hive weight and feed if needed. During the springtime, there's an abundance of flowers available. The days are getting longer and still warming up. You'll be watching the brood nest, and typically you won't be feeding during this time, especially if you plan to harvest honey. Exceptions may be caught swarms or newly installed packages that need a little help as they ramp up in population and have to draw out new comb. During the summertime, in many places, there will still be ample flowers available. Days are still longer, and if temperatures are high enough or rainfall is low enough, a dearth can happen due to dried up flowers. This is typically the time you would harvest any honey you plan to harvest and leave enough for the bees to get through the rest of summer and into fall and early winter. If you are feeding during the dearth, then make sure you feed quickly to avoid robbing. During the fall, bees have one last shot at collecting food for winter. There's often a fall honey flow that will allow the bees to store up nectar and backfill the brood nest as the days begin to get shorter. You'll begin monitoring the weight of the hives so that you can feed with winter weight goals in mind if necessary. Depending on your area and the hive population, you'll want to ensure that you have plenty of honey stores as you approach the winter. Once winter hits, you'll hopefully be done with regular hive maintenance and can leave the hives alone. You can still monitor weight by tipping the hives if necessary. Know that food availability is scarce and you'll only be feeding in case of emergency. Exceptions would be with commercial or migratory beekeeping when feeding starts again, often in January, to get the bees ready to ramp up for February almond pollination in California. So we understand how the seasons affect honeybee nutrition, so let's talk about how the weather can impact bee nutrition. Rain is essential for creating flowers and is super important in the fall and winter months to ensure a good spring flower crop. However, rain during a bloom can wash out nectar and pollen from the flowers, prevent the bees from foraging, and reduce the concentration of nectar within the flowers themselves. So in case of frequent rain during the bloom, your honey crop may be negatively affected. Heat can affect bee nutrition by burning up flower plants and causing a dearth. Warm bees are active, and active bees expend more energy and consume more food, leaving less excess nectar and honey. High heat can also negatively impact your honey crop for these reasons. During cold, especially at freezing or below freezing temperatures, bees will go into an inactive, tightly clustered state of torpor. This is the equivalent of bee hibernation. Bees will expend less energy and consume less food during this cold. It's also important to note that in order for the bees to easily access food frames during cold weather, they'll need a population great enough for the cluster to easily move across frames to access stored resources. You can see how extreme weather can negatively impact the bees' ability to forage or even cause them to tap into more food stores than usual. So you'll need to be prepared to feed if necessary. Let's dig into the how and why to feed your bees. There are many types of feeders, and these are the most common and popular feeders. You don't have to fill up your feeders all the way, so you'll want to watch the speed of the bees and not feed them any more than they consume in a few days or a week. Top feeders are a great resource for fall and winter, but to me, they're not that great for spring and summer because you will be inspecting more frequently, and they can make that a little more difficult. It's too tempting to just fill it up and move on. Plus, it can be more difficult if they have liquid left in them, and if you don't need to be feeding at all, they're a waste of space. In-hive feeders are what we use the most frequently personally because they can be left in the hive whether they're being used currently or not, and they're always in the same place. Entrance feeders are nice because you can see the speed the bees are consuming the feed, but they come with a bigger risk of attracting robbers. So for this reason, we really don't recommend entrance feeders. These entrance feeders can be modified to be used inside the hive by placing them on top of an inner cover or inside of a top bar hive for feeding similarly to the chicken water feeders. The actual mixing of sugar water or feed is quite simple. You want to feed with a purpose and keep it as simple as possible. Key concepts to consider are 1. A 1-to-1 sugar water mixture simulates nectar and will stimulate the colony growth. And 2, 2-to-1 sugar water will help your bees add weight. So this is a common strategy for feeding during the fall and winter preparation. When mixing, don't stress. Whatever container you're filling, a 1-to-1 mixture looks about like a third sugar and filling the rest with water. 2-to-1 mixture is best with warm water, and you will basically fit as much sugar as you possibly can dissolve into that water mixture. We've talked about how good nutrition affects the hive, but let's discuss the risk associated with nutritional deficiency. A lack of protein can lower the bee's immune response and decrease the ability to create royal jelly to feed the developing larvae. So if bees do not have enough quality food, it can cause a reduction of brood and egg production, and the bees may even cannibalize the brood in order to meet their protein needs. When bees consume honey, they actually produce hydrogen peroxide, which then adds to the hive's immune response. So a lack of honey to consume can actually negatively impact the bee's immunity. There are negative impacts of overfeeding your bees as well, so make sure you keep an eye out for signs that your bees are getting too much food. The biggest indicator is that the queen may run out of space to lay because the brood nest is being filled with nectar or sugar water. In these cases, back off on feeding or quit feeding completely. This balance is crucial to making sure the queen can continue to lay so that the population of the hive continues to increase. This is especially common with brand new colonies when drawn out frames are scarce. This is one reason why we suggest feeding in small amounts more frequently rather than large amounts. Our motto for bee nutrition is keep it simple. There are plenty of products available that can be added to your feed to increase consumption or stimulate the bees, and these are worth a try, but the basic sugar water recipe also works. So pick a strategy that works for you and your budget. We've heard of even big beekeepers using cheap sugar alternatives when available, from candy peppermints to high fructose corn syrup, and beekeepers have used whatever bulk sugars they can find in their area. At the end of the day, the bee's nutritional needs are critical, but that's also quite simple, so don't overcomplicate it without a good reason. We hope you learned something today about bee nutrition and how to better manage the bee's nutritional needs throughout the seasons. Thanks, as always, for joining us. Until next time, enjoy the bees.